Hello and welcome to Season 2 of Distilling Cyber Policy. I'm Alex Botting with Venable, and I'm joined by my co-host, Jen Ellis of the Centre for Cybersecurity Policy and Law. Hello and welcome back, Jen.
Alex, we didn't get nixed. What happened? I thought this was it, a life of leisure for me from now on, but here we are again.
It's one of those where I'm glad we're back, but you've got to judge the people who made that decision.
Right, absolutely. That's it. You've summarized how I feel. I suppose we should say a very awkward, late Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Welcome to 2024.
In March.
Well, no one ever said I was punctual in my entire life.
But no, in all seriousness, thanks to all the listeners in Season 1 and the guests, and of course to the Centre for Cyber Policy and Law for continuing the podcast. It has been a busy start to the year, Jen. We're seeing things dropped already. And the first of those, as of February 26th, is the Cybersecurity Framework 2.0. So folks may well be familiar with the NIST Cybersecurity Framework for critical infrastructure. It is a widely utilized risk management tool. Anecdotally, we have heard around a third of US companies and a third of Japanese companies use the framework, in addition to US government agencies. It is unclear exactly where those statistics came from, but they do seem to be widely replicated.
So for those who are, have been living under a rock or whatever, NIST is the
National Institute for Standards and Technology.
Right, and is a US government entity, right? Sits within the Department of Commerce, and they developed the original cybersecurity, the NIST cybersecurity framework, like some years ago. I actually don't know how many years ago, but quite a few years ago now, right? It's been around for a while. Better
part of a decade, I think is fair to say.
Perfect. And so this is an update to that's just been released. Maybe this seems like a big topic. Maybe we could have a little episode on it.
I think that would be a great idea. And, very high level, what's the big change? Well, in the old version, you had 5 functions that you would build your framework around: identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. And those have now been supplemented with one on governance, which sits across all of those and should give senior management more scope within the context of the framework to be providing that governance function over each of those different factors.
Interesting. I mean, that speaks, doesn't it? That really sort of says that there is a view here that, one, the leadership of organizations needs to be paying a lot more attention to cybersecurity and need to be providing support and air cover to their operational teams. And it also speaks to how much the standards environment has developed, right?
Very much so. Very much so. My only other initial thought that I'd throw out for the group, and completely agree we should do an episode specifically on the framework, is the international portion, right? NIST has always been focused on this being a tool that's fit for different organizations of different sizes and different sectors, but also the global aspect. They worked very hard to engage foreign governments and industry in the development of the framework. But I think the rubber really meets the road on that one, where we see other governments that use the 1.0 updating to the 2.0 in their national frameworks, as well as what other governments will look to this as a useful document and incorporate it. And I don't think that's going to be easy, but I do think NIST has done some good work to tee themselves up for success there.
Very cool. So basically, watch the space. We'll try and do more on this coming soon.
What else have we got going on in the world, Jen?
So the UK's been up to some other things. There are a couple of calls for views open that listeners might be interested in. So the first comes from, it's actually a special review that's been sort of, I don't think commission's not the right word, but the UK government has appointed the Right Honourable Stephen McPartland MP to conduct an independent review into cybersecurity as an enabler of economic growth, which I think is a really interesting topic, right? Because normally the way that people talk about security is very much as like the bank of no. And, there's this view of it as like sort of holding back growth and holding back opportunity and being like hyper risk adverse and all that kind of stuff. And so the idea of it is like economic growth, I think, is really, really interesting. That is something that we'll include links to all of these things in the blog. You can check out, and we'll have a link for where people can respond to that. And then the other one is from the Home Office, and it's on the cyber duty to protect. So the Home Office basically deals with anything that's sort of to do with crime as relates to cyber policy. This survey is a little trickier in that the way that Home Office surveys work is you can't get normally with a government survey in the UK, you can see the whole survey and then you can kind of decide which bits you might want to respond to and you can pass it around to other people who might want to weigh in on it. With the Home Office one, I can't figure out how you do that. As far as I can tell, like you basically have to walk through the policy and the survey and just answer all the questions as you come to them. You can't see it in advance because it's a click through. And they do say you have to answer all the questions. But basically what they're looking at is three main areas of inquiry. One, reducing unauthorized access through improving security and account login processes. I think that we're looking at some know your customer type stuff here. In the UK, fraud is the biggest crime by quite a way, and it costs the UK economy a vast amount of money. And so I think we're going to see a lot more expansion of know your customer requirements. The second is hardening data held by providers to mitigate the risks of data breaches. And then the third area is reducing the presence of malicious websites or servers through voluntary interventions by internet infrastructure providers. So if you are an internet infrastructure provider, this survey is for you. You will want to take a look at it and pay attention. But generally speaking, if you work for a technology company, not just a security company, but a technology company, I think it's probably worth taking a look at this report because I think it could, because I think it could have some implications. So it's good for you to have your say. And again, we will have a link to the slightly tricksy survey in our blog. So that's the news out of the UK. I'm sure other regions are also active, but that happens to be the one I know about right now. And with that, we should go on to our first interview of the new season. So Alex, for our first episode back in season 2, we have a guest who's been around in the cyber policy sphere for a really long time and has it's impossible to not say pretty bloody impactful, let's be honest. We're joined by Mark Montgomery, the director of the Cyber Solarium Commission 2.0 and senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. And welcome, Mark. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
So the Cyber Solarium Commission, I feel like has been really impactful, but there may be some people listening who are not familiar with it. So can you give us like a bit of a quick potted history on what was the commission, where is it now, like what was the point, how was it formed, et cetera, et cetera? How did you get involved?
Thanks. So, okay, I'll give you the origin story. So what happened was that for a series of years, some members of the House and Senate were trying to get a more comprehensive approach to cybersecurity. You couldn't, Representative Jim Langevin in the House, Senator Ben Sass in the Senate, some others, Senator King in the Senate, when they would ask a question at a hearing, the person they'd be talking to, either from DOD or the intelligence community or Homeland Security or Department of Energy, would very specifically answer the question for themselves. You could not get kind of a idea of a comprehensive approach. And when you went to the White House, there was no real comprehensive approach. And so they began to get concerned. They went to Senator John McCain, who was head of the Senate Armed Services Committee. And they went to him because if you're going to get anything big done, you're going to do it in the National Defense Authorization Act. That's the one vehicle you can get done in.
Yeah.
And so I was working for him as his policy director. And I just retired from the military. He'd hired me in. I was there for about 2 years with him until he passed away. But this was at the beginning of that time. And Senator Sass came to him. And I got to tell you, Senator McCain, not a big fan of commissions, he kind of felt the executive branch could get things done or the legislature could get things done. But when he looked at all these issues, and really when you looked at it, there was he would go back and say the the U.S. response to the North Korean attack on Sony was completely unsatisfying. We kind of like several months later indicted 4 North Korean majors who immediately were given awards by Kim Jong-un for being indicted. And no one's being extradited from North Korea, right? The other one was the Chinese theft of OPM, Office of Personnel Management, 24 million records, including his and mine and a lot of other people on the committees.
Right.
That really pissed him off. And then the coup de grace was the Russian cyber-enabled information operations attacks on our elections in 2016 and eventually what would become 2018. And, he said, all right, we're going to do something. So we got this together. Jim Langevin had been pushing something like this in the House. Ben Sasse was pushing it in the Senate. And we passed the a request for a commission. But he was smart, McCain. He's like, hey, look, we're not taking 3 or 4 years to do this. You have 1 year to write a report and some time after that to implement the findings. I want you to go out there and tell me what is a proper strategic approach to defend ourselves in cyberspace, or to defend our critical infrastructure in cyberspace. And very specifically, what should we do legislatively and executive branch to get that done? As it happens, because of politics and everything, the chairman became, the Democrat was from the Senate. It was Angus King, who's an independent who caucuses with the Democrats. He's from Maine. And then representative in the House was Mike Gallagher, who's a Republican from Wisconsin. So they're the 2 chairmen. We have Senator Sasse, and Representative Langevin. Representative Langevin is by far the most experienced and decorated, so to speak, legislature. He's recently retired.
He was actually a guest during our first season. We caught up with him and what he's been doing post leaving the Hill. It was great to chat with him, and we will include a link to that episode in the show notes.
I presume that's the top line of his CV at this point, is guest on Distilling Cyber Policy.
Right, absolutely. Of course, it only follows.
20 years as a congressman,
Yeah.
Podcast. All right. So then we got 4 other, and here's what was unique. We had 4 serving executive branch leaders. Probably not legal, but we did it anyway. And you had the head of the FBI, Deputy Secretary of Defense, Deputy Homeland Security, and Deputy Director of National Intelligence. And then 6 civilian experts, CEO of a major company, Southern company, Tom Fanning, previous government worker, leaders in cyber, Suzanne Spalding from the Democratic side, Samantha Ravitch from the Republican side, Frank Salifo from the Republican side, and then Patrick Murphy, a former congressman from the Democratic side. So, and then most importantly, Chris Inglis, the former deputy director of the National Security Agency at the time. So we had all these experts. We got together. We very quickly I got a good staff together, a mix of, detailees plus hirees. Very rapidly, we didn't break rules, but we definitely were innovative in how we got everybody up and running. So that we had our first meeting, and we appointed everybody. I was appointed in February, and we were up and running, and had our first meeting at the end of March, and hired staff along the way, and then finished our report the next March 20th. So less than a year after our first meeting, the report done with 82 recommendations, plus guidance to do 5 or 6 more white papers with more recommendations. So we then began to tackle, and our general approach was, hey, the strategic approach is that we have to, A, defend ourselves better. We have to expend money, both in the government and the private sector, to defend ourselves. B, the government has to be a better partner in the public-private collaboration. And C, we need to enhance our offensive capabilities so that we can hold adversaries at risk. And that led to 6 lines of effort, which we tackled. And some of our, we then began to tackle legislation. As I said, we had 82 recommendations. Of those original 82, 70% are complete or reasonably close to completion. Some that would take 3 or 4 years aren't yet.
I was going to say, I was looking at your tracker on the FTD website, Mark, and it's pretty remarkable the amount that have been implemented. I think it's 56 have been implemented or near implementation, and then another 18 that are on track. That's a pretty stunning record for a government commission.
That's right. That's the total from the white papers plus that, which is about 110 or so, 120 recommendations. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And from my perspective, the reason we were successful is we were iterative, right? The first year we got about 40 things done. The next year we got about 30 things done. We then, after we had that first 2 years after the first year writing a report, then 2 years of trying to implement, we sunsetted the commission, which is what you should do. Federal commission shouldn't run forever.
Right.
And then Senator King, Representative Gallagher, and I sat down with Representative Langevin, who was just getting ready to stand down, and we said, look, we got to keep this thing going. It shouldn't be as a federal commission anymore. So we'll set up a nonprofit. The only requirement I kind of got was, hey, go find a think tank that takes no foreign and no corporate money. Well, it turns out in Washington, that's not an easy thing, right? So, there might be 150 think tanks in Washington. There's probably less than 5 that have no foreign and no corporate money. But I found one. And in fact, Samantha Ravitch, one of our commissioners, was at it. And another thing, it had to have some cyber hook, right? You couldn't just code a think tank cyber, a think tank on like food and agriculture and say, hey, we're here to run your cyber section. So we found one in FDD, set up here, raised a little bit of money to keep staff dedicated to this. A bunch of us took other jobs inside FDD to kind of like defray the cost. But the bottom line is we kept it going. And now for 2 more years, we've done Cyber Solarium 2.0 under King and Gallagher's guidance. And we're generally attacking the outstanding recommendations. That's our first job. But then looking at issues that kind of like, branches of problems we looked at. So we looked at the cyber workforce in our report, but then we've done even more detailed reporting on that. We looked at the critical infrastructures and said, these 6 or 7 are weaker, water, maritime transport, rail, aviation, food and agricultural, healthcare. So we're tackling each one of those with reports and then proposed recommendations. So we're generating even more recommendations now, even while we continue to knock down the old ones. And, we probably only get 30% of the things we try each year done, recommendation-wise, legislation-wise. But, Angus King has a great saying. He goes, look, if I hit 300 for 5 years playing for the New York Yankees, I get a $10 million contract for $100 million contract for 10 years. And he's right. We would, that's the theory. And that's what you can do by taking this kind of very deliberate long-term approach to getting it done. We can dig into the details. And so the really big ones are neat, like getting a national cyber director created, creating the Cyber Diplomacy Act, which created the Nate Fick job at State Department, having a dedicated cyber and digital policy bureau, or, strengthening CISA, helping get its budget doubled, because we work a lot on approach as well. We've had like 50 or 60, separate from all the ones you can track. We've had 50 or 60 efforts to raise appropriations in specific agencies. And again, about 30% successful. Those kind of things really matter, but, we now see all these new things to go. You know what I mean? It doesn't end, like we will eventually sunset 2.0 as well, but it won't be because it's job complete. It'll be because energy expended, you know what I mean? And of course, we are losing now. Representative Gallagher has announced his intention to retire from Congress at the end of this, at the end of 118th Congress. So we'll be down to 1 serving member of Congress and Senator Angus King.
Do you think, so as you say, like we're down to 1 of the original group, and actually beyond that, it feels to me, I don't work as closely with Congress these days as I used to when I lived in the States, but it feels to me as though a lot of the leading voices that we had in Congress and cybersecurity have gone or are going. Do you think that we're in a weaker spot now in terms of our congressional focus and understanding of the issue? Do you think new voices will emerge? Like, what do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I think there will. First of all, I would say Mike Rounds is another senator who's been committed to this topic for a decade. So, and we still have him, a Republican from South Dakota, and he's the ranking on the Cyber Committee in the Senate, Senate Armed Services. And so he could become chairman a year from now as well. So potentially even more, more powerful position. And he's always been it. And then Senator Gary Peters runs Homeland Security in the Senate as a Democrat, and he has been very strong on this issue. So there's a couple very strong. And then finally, Senator Rosen in the Democrat in the Senate, she and her staff, she has a staffer named Daniel Gleber, but she particularly has cranked a lot of legislation over the last few years. So in the Senate, there's still some players. In the House, it's interesting. When Will Hurd left, everybody said, well, we're losing one of the big cyber voices. Then Jim Langevin left, and you're like, we're losing the biggest cyber voice. And then Gallagher steps up. But the others I see like Representative Garbarino from New York, Andrew Garbarino, who runs the House Homeland Security Cyber Subcommittee. Very interested, very engaged on this. Morgan Luttrell, a Republican from Texas and the former Navy SEAL, but he's on both the Homeland Cyber and the Armed Services Cyber, very interested in this. We see on the Democratic side, Richie Torres from New York and Ro Khanna from California, both engaged on this. Probably none of the people I mentioned have the kind of like the productivity pedigree of Langevin or Gallagher, who each have authored 40 or 50 cyber pieces of legislation over the last 5 to 10 years. So, I mean, there's nobody quite like that. But then again, because they were doing it, there wasn't room. Other people weren't doing it.
Sure. Yeah.
I'll give you one more. Chrissy Houlihan, very engaged on this in the House. So, and she does have 10 or 15 pieces of legislation to her credit. So there are people out there, but you're right.
But I am actually reassured though, because like you have come up with a pretty decent list, and I take your point that actually when you have really, really strong players, it doesn't leave that much room for others to focus on it. It's not like it's a topic that's going away, and maybe the AI stuff will help bring new voices into it. So yeah, interesting. I feel better though for the fact that you've been able to reel off a list of names. Definitely feel better for that. Thank you.
Looking at some of the bigger issues on the cyber landscape at the moment, so if we think about, obviously ransomware over the last couple of years, the significant cyber component of what's happening in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, growing attacks by, or even pre-positioning by Russian or Chinese actors on critical infrastructure. What's left, Mark, that hasn't been implemented yet that might be able to assist us with some of those big topics that you think we should be prioritizing right now?
So if you'd asked me what's your number one priority for this year, I would have said exactly where you're heading, which is how do we secure the cybersecurity of the critical infrastructure around our military mobility, which is rail, air, ports, and our economic productivity, which is electrical power grid, financial services. Those are like the two big ones. They're kind of related. If you think about Chinese, the multi-food, the operations that have been revealed about China, they're exactly attacking these things. So you ask, what can we do? Almost all of those sectors need legislative support. In my mind, the port systems need. Look, we had written a very long paper. Many of our recommendations were just adapted by. So we'll get a few more positive numbers for that list on the FTD website by the Biden administration's executive order. But there's some things in there they're going to need legislative or appropriation support. So we got to go attack that to make sure that the Coast Guard, as sector risk management agency, has enough money and that the Coast Guard has the right authorities, that kind of stuff. In the rail system, there's just been some new regulation, but I suspect there's some appropriations needed for TSA. And in aviation, while I feel very comfortable about the aircraft now, we've taken a hard look at how Boeing and Airbus do aircraft design. And, they really put the right amount of money into cybersecurity there. And I think they work really reasonably cooperatively, which is probably how you describe Boeing and Airbus on a day-to-day basis. But when you think about the airport authorities, I don't have any of that level of confidence. When I think about the air traffic control software, having observed it crash last year, when they tried to do a software upgrade, and I think they had to call in a guy that had retired 10 years earlier to fix the problem. I'm not saying they're running Windows 7, in air traffic control, but I'm not confident they're running anything, I don't think they're properly modernized or secure. So those are areas that need some work. And in the ones, the other ones I mentioned, energy, I think financial services is actually in pretty good shape, but energy could use work. We could support them with legislation for what's called the ETAC, which is a way of transferring information between energy companies and the government about the threats they see. So all kinds of, what I'd say is there's lots of opportunity out there. There's lots of work to get done. And the good news is it's right in the number one priority, because if there's anything people are interested in right now, it's like, how do we push back on this Chinese penetration of our critical infrastructures? I think it wasn't a shock to us in the Solarium 2.0 or many people on the Hill. I think it was a shock to the American public to hear the degree to which China is penetrating these systems.
With that said, do you think, the current administration has had, I think, a big focus on cybersecurity, right? And I think that, some of the things that you've mentioned so far in this conversation about, things like creating the National Cyber Directorate, for example, and the increased spending for CISA and the work the State Department's doing, demonstrates that this administration has been quite focused on the issues around cybersecurity. And let's face it, at the beginning of the administration, there was that run of super high profile ransomware attacks that kind of put it pretty firmly in the crosshairs. Do you think the prior administration was much less interested? It felt like much less interested and much less invested in cybersecurity. Do you think that's changed now? Do you think that if we have a change of government in the US, we are in an election year, I have to ask this question, do you think there will still be this level of focus on cybersecurity and sort of national security from cyber threats?
So a qualified yes. And here's the qualification. First, I will say this administration, much like the Trump administration, opposed the National Cyber Director aggressively until it was shoved down their throat. And now they accept it. But they have been the National Security Council has done a much more aggressive job under Ann Neuberger than under her predecessors in the last administration. So I generally accept your point that this administration has done a good job and probably a better job than their predecessors. One thing I would say, the CISA budget is a product of the Congress.
Sure.
Congress added that money and not the
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. Sorry, great point. Yeah.
Yeah, they weren't going to cut something else in DHS, the administration. So, but having said that, I accept the general belief that things are much better. The executive branch is doing better. I think Jen Easterly's done a very good job leading CISA, creating the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative and other things. Nothing's perfect. Nothing's there. Now, in a transition. So I think whoever they bring in on the other side, if they were to win the election, would be committed to cybersecurity. The qualified part of it is they're going to do something to CISA. I guess if you consider that President Trump is the likely Republican nominee at this point, he does not have a lot of love for CISA personally. And I believe
that's a fair statement. Yep.
Yeah, and I believe he's someone that takes action when he doesn't like people. So my gut reaction is that CISA, as we envision it today, would be changed, which is a mistake, obviously a major mistake, and would be redound poorly to his, to the performance of cybersecurity if we were to weaken in any way or defund in any way CISA. And it's, I don't want to get into the whole disinformation argument, but I'll just say the president completely misunderstands what CISA has done or is doing. But I'm confident he'll use that misunderstanding to do the wrong thing. Having said that, inside, do I think that they'll still value the National Cyber Director? Yes. Do I think they'll still be pumping money into DOD where it needs to be? Yes. Do I think, we'll be spending $13 billion on the .gov and $13 billion on the .mil in cybersecurity? Yes. Those are the generally rough numbers. So I think that stuff will happen. I just think there'll be pernicious little things that could undermine security a little bit.
Right. That's super interesting. Last question from me, which is because we've taken a lot of your time. We've talked a lot about the highlights, right? And you guys have had a lot of highlights. As I said at the beginning, you've created a lot of impact, and it's fantastic to see. What haven't you got done? What couldn't you get done? What still grinds your gears that it's not happened?
I will say that these are the things that bother me the most. And then I'll say what are the biggest picture things, because the ones that bother me are the ones that I've been trying to get done. They may not be the most important things, but I think they're important. The number one is we've been pushing for a better way of recruiting, onboarding, training, developing, and retaining the federal cyber workforce. We came up with an idea called a Federal Cyber Workforce Development Institute that would help as someone gets, picked through the USA job system, they would then enter a 2 to 3 month online training program while they're getting their interim secret clearance. So you're saving time. They get a stipend while they do this. They study, they work, and they get onboarded into how the federal government does cybersecurity. They also, this helps understand what their actual skill sets are, where they could be best used in that organization that's hiring them. As they complete the course, they take on their government job and they have their interim secret clearance. And then you can use this same institute as someone wants to go from entry level to mid level. So instead of poaching people, you actually take your own people into this program and develop them, get them the next level certificates so you can come back at the higher level. And a final thing I do with this is train HR people, with week-long courses that say, here's, even though you work at the Department of Agriculture and you're a world-class hirer of food inspectors, next week you actually have to hire an IT person. When you're hiring that cybersecurity person for this skill set, here's how you use the NICE NIST, which is the hiring framework. Mm-hmm. Government. It's a program run out of NIST. with 52 different cyber skills programs, and here's how you use that to determine the right person to hire. Anyway, this institute seems like a no-brainer to make a more efficient, effective program. I say this uncomfortably, run out of OPM, because OPM, they haven't done great on this. I don't blame them totally, but the agencies haven't been helpful. But I think they're the right place to run it with some national cyber director oversight. I think they could do it, NCD and OPM together. That's when we ought to get done. And it's hung up. They're not pushing it. They're not fighting it, the executive branch, but I can't get it through the House and Senate right now. To me, that would be a big one. The second one it has to do with water. And as an example to kind of all the low-hanging fruit, like the less visible, less sexy critical infrastructures. And water is the perfect description of that. Water, right now the problem with water is if they're poor companies, right, that run their federal utilities run most of it, like Farquhar County Water or whatever, they don't have a lot of money. They don't have a way of raising capital.
Right.
Have excess. It's hard for them to fix cybersecurity. On making this worse, there's support elements, the EPA, which has $5 million dedicated to this project, which serves 55,000 utilities, and 4 or 5 people. That's not oversight. They certainly couldn't regulate if they wanted to. So what we thought was, hey, let's create a private-public, a collaborative to set a standard, let EPA set the standard working with CISA and NIST. Then this nonprofit would go assess, everyone would join this. They'd assess utilities, help utilities assess themselves, show them their flaws, give them a time period to fix it. If they didn't fix it, you'd fine them a light amount, something that EPA said. But in reality, help them find the funding to fix it. That kind of stuff, this kind of a joint public-private collaborative to raise the cybersecurity standard. From my perspective, that's a useful product. The Department of Energy used something like this years ago called the NERC. Now, they also have a heavily regulated side on what's called the FERC. But, This is the non-regulatory approach of raising everything. Should be doable. Both the EPA is like, we don't like that. We can't do anything. We're completely incapable, but we don't want that, and that's not helpful. Yeah. And then the Congress is loath to go, one party's loath to go against the EPA. And I'm like, this isn't an EPA thing. This is a water cybersecurity thing. Let's get this going. Yep. So to me, that's another big one. So those are they seem like low-hanging fruit or but those are the kind of blocking and tackling things that make us more secure, that make the federal government more secure, make the water secure. You could rinse and repeat that water one in healthcare.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Because I got to tell you, healthcare and food and ag are dumpster fire. I mean, water is like the leading edge dumpster fire, but right behind them is healthcare, which is getting mauled by ransomware right now. And then if I think about rural healthcare, I mean, right now, I'll say one thing on healthcare, that it is absolutely provable that morbidity is raised. If you have a ransomware incident in a hospital and you're down for a week with the ransomware and 2 or 3 weeks with recovery, over that 3 or 4 week period, you have an increased morbidity or mortality rate in those hospitals. People are being killed by these events. And it's not just like dude in ambulance has to drive another 20 miles and dies, right? That one's easy lawsuit. It's the one where you don't know which person in intensive care died because the nurse's station no longer had a piped in watch 10 at once, but the nurse had to walk from one to the other. And of course, they've reduced their number of nurses and practitioners as they automated, and the automation's gone. Yep. And you can't there's not like a nurses for hire phone number, right? You know what I mean? That you can get them right back. And now I think about rural hospitals where this problem happens and it's another 2 hours, to get to the next hospital. Yep. That's when people choose not to go. Yep. And they die at home. I mean, you can just imagine what a serious issue this is. And we're all kind of turning our head and coughing. This is not a sustainable environment we have in healthcare right now in cybersecurity. We got to fix it.
I could not agree with you more. And I really love hearing you bang the drum on that, because I think that drum needs to be banged very loud, very frequently until people start paying more attention. So, yeah. I think that's a really powerful note to end on. Thank you so much, Mark. Really, Really appreciate you joining us. Super interesting to hear about some of the stuff that you guys have been working on, and hopefully some of the problems that you might tackle in the future. Hint, hint. Water, healthcare. Awesome. And let us know how we can help. I guess then, having had the awesome interview, now we get to move on to the humiliation part of the episode with the Mystery Trivia Master. Hooray!
That was a fantastic conversation with Mark. And if you were disappointed, dear listener, that is the end of our Cyberspace Solarium Commission content for the week, we have got a great surprise for you because we've got more CSC coming your way.
No!
More CSC, I tell you. So our Mystery Trivia Master for the week was currently at Google's Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, was formerly at the Cyberspace Solarium Commission, and one of the key staff members in pulling together their report and recommendations. Tatiana Bolton, welcome to the podcast.
Whoop, whoop. Hey, Tatiana.
Hello. Thank you for having me. It's very exciting to be here.
Thank you for joining us and bringing more solarium-y goodness.
Absolutely. Can you ever have enough?
I've heard not. I will do the research to find out.
So you've got quite the background, Tatiana, not just Google, not just CSC, which would be plenty to fill out an impressive resume. But before that, you were at CISA and at DOD. And if I remember correctly, you were at Venable before, well, certainly before I was, but going back many years, is that right?
Yes. Turns out when you move to DC with just a bachelor's degree, it's a pretty good job as an executive assistant. That was how I started way back in the day.
It's just superhero origin story.
That's how I would frame it.
So what question have you got to demonstrate our lack of general knowledge about cyber policy?
What critically important topic did the commission famously not provide recommendations on or said very little on?
Liability?
Not liability.
Hackback?
Nope. It was the debate on encryption.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. That's good. I like that.
Which I think is reasonable that you guys were like,
there continues to be ongoing debate between the proponents of lawful access and the proponents for encryption, both at rest and in transit. So it continues to beguile policymakers as to how to balance those two legitimate positions.
Yeah, priorities. It is really difficult, and I think with what you were looking at, trying to balance, because what you guys were trying to do was balance both national security and then sort of day-to-day societal security, and the reality is you kind of need both aspects for that. So it's hard.
Yeah.
I totally get why that was not one that you decided to come down on super strong.
Well, we also felt like of the other recommendations, many of them were generally agreed upon within the policy community, or at a minimum, there were reports that either encouraged some of those recommendations or agencies that were interested in taking them up. I think, this one was one where there was just a raging debate.
Yeah. And it's not really gone anywhere, has it? Since.
Not
yeah.
So,
which is a bit of a shame. It kind of needs a little bit more collaborative focus, I think. But I'm not sure that will happen anytime soon.
Well, I will say there were 35 people on the staff of the commission that worked in 4 groups, and then with our chief of staff, Deb Grays, and others that helped with security, that helped with the setup of the commission, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah,
and it was an amazing team. And we loved every minute of it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Tatiana. That was awesome.
Thanks, Tatiana.
Thanks for having me.
Alex, neither of us have shifted the score.
We got a nice old break there around the new year, and nothing has changed.
Brilliant. Well, so that just leaves us to say again, thank you to our guests, Mark Montgomery and Tatiana Bolton. And thank you to my wonderful co-host, Alex, and our incredible producer, Inez. If you have topics you want us to cover, please let us know. You can tweet us. You can put something on LinkedIn. I think there's a way of contacting us in the blog, so look out for that. Or if you want to volunteer to be a mystery trivia master of the future and have your shot at humiliating me, then please do let us know. We want to hear from you. Until the next episode. Thanks.